The A90 Supra is probably going to be the fastest car that I own. It's going to make a lot of power. In order to achieve that power, we're going to need the right supporting mods, which is exactly what we're working on today. One of the biggest challenges when trying to make a lot of power, especially with these turbocharged engines like the BMW B58, is the heat management. There's only so much you can push these cars, whether you're at the track or you're going for some serious spirited driving, before the stock cooling components start to show their weakness. Performance wise, if you have a stock car and you don't really have it tuned for performance, running the stock cooling components, it's not really an issue. I mean, the car was designed to run with those parts. The issue arises once you're trying to tune the car for performance and you're making a lot more power, then you're hitting the limitations of those cooling components, and then it becomes an issue. Another thing to consider is long-term reliability. A lot of these key components are partially made with plastic. Heat, plastic don't really get along if the car has a lot of miles. Then they tend to get brittle, they start to fail, and then having a cooling part fail is not a good thing. So what I'm doing with the Supra today is address future reliability concerns and also upgrade pretty much every key cooling component for the B58 so we can make some very big power reliably. So I'll quickly go over everything that we have on the table that's being installed onto the Supra. This is all from a company called CSF, which you guys should be very familiar with. The very first one here is a transmission cooler, which by the name is pretty self-explanatory, cools the transmission fluid. If you guys are doing excessive launches, a lot of gear shifting, you're really tracking the car, this is a very useful upgrade. As you guys can see, it's like double stacked and it's finished in this very nice gloss black color. Then we have two high performance auxiliary radiators. These are the ones that you find on passenger and driver side right behind the bumper. These assist the bigger radiators that are up front. We'll talk a little bit more about these later on. These two upgrades right here are very important. As you increase power, it becomes more difficult to consistently keep those intake temperatures down. If those intake temperatures are too high, you tend to lose power. And if they get very high, the car might even go into drive chain malfunction or limp mode where you completely lose all the power. So here's a solution to keep those intake temperatures low. We have a high performance, very beefy heat exchanger. Compared to the OEM one, which I'll show you guys a comparison later on, this is much thicker, partly because it is a triple pass system. So it's a lot more efficient when it comes to cooling. The coolant that passes through it, very, very thick metal end tanks for reliabilities. We'll talk a little bit more about it later on once we have both of them side by side. And right here we have the Superstar. I'll go ahead and clear the table. This is what CSF calls their Super Manifold. It's an intake manifold intercooler all-in-one unit, just like the OEM one, but unlike the OEM one, construction-wise, this is billet aluminum versus plastic, so it should be a lot more reliable long-term. It is bigger, it has a bigger core, so it should be a lot more efficient with keeping those intake temperatures down. And for car enthusiasts that really want to add tons of power and make your car very fast, you have added features here that the stock one doesn't come with, like this little small ones up here for meth injection or nitrous, and then these right here, which we're definitely going to be using for port injection. You also get 3 ports back here, and these are for measuring additional parameters. You can also use them as an additional vacuum source. And the 2 ports that we see on this side, I believe they're to read the inlet and outlet coolant temperature, or you can also use them as breather ports. Here's a closer look at the manifold so you guys can see the build quality and the craftsmanship. It looks very nice in person, guys. I hope you guys can see on video. The welds are very consistent. You have company branding here. The stripe design is very, very cool. And here's what it looks like on the side, the ports. If you flip it to the back side, that's what it looks like. Very consistent welds again. Here's what the outlet side looks like. Very cool. This is a very nice product. High quality. Might sound like a sellout here, but until you guys see and actually touch one of these in person, you'd understand what I'm talking about. The price definitely reflects it. I'm sure that's gonna be a hot talking point when you guys see how much this costs. But for you B58 Gen 2 guys that are serious about making power reliably and you need all the extra features like port injection ports, meth, nitrous and stuff like that, this is a very good option that's pretty much never gonna fail on you. Let's go ahead and talk about the color, which I think it's a beautiful color that goes along very well with the white Supra. But also, I did ask CSF originally if they can try their best to match the finish on the Titan 7 wheels that I recently installed in the Supra, and I think they did a very, very nice job. The texture is really cool. It is powder coated, and I think it's also thermo coated, so it should help with heat management under the hood. Looking at this for the first time, it might seem very complicated and intimidating to try to do this DIY yourself. But what's really cool about it is it's all labeled, and it's all referenced in the manual by the labels. So it's very easy to just follow along, and it literally tells you where everything is used and how to use it. So here's what the Supra looks like right now. All the parts I needed to come off to get to this point is absolutely absurd. Very time consuming. Obviously it took a little bit longer because I was using hand tools, so I can be a little bit more relatable to you guys, but still a lot of work. Just take a look at all the parts that came off of the car here, some here, all the hardware that I tried my best to organize so I don't forget where they all go. We do got some parts tucked behind the back, and we're still not done because to get the manifold installed, there's a lot that still needs to be done on this side. The auxiliary radiators on the driver and passenger side have some brackets that need to be removed. So we're still not done, but at least now you guys have an idea of things you have to remove to upgrade all the products that CSF offers for the B58. The B58, just like other modern BMW engines, uses a completely different cooling system, unlike older BMWs that have an air-to-air front mount intercooler that I'm sure a lot of you guys see around. This one has a water to air intercooler, which is that CSF one we've been talking about. What you guys see right here are two radiators. Well, you have the main radiator combined with the little radiator that's on the driver's side. It's responsible for cooling the engine and the turbo. It's part of the what they call the high temp circuit. And then this one is the one we're gonna upgrade today. This is a heat exchanger combined with the radiator on this side, and that's responsible for cooling down the charge air that enters the car. And that's part of the low temp circuit. As you guys can see here, we have two coolant reservoirs. The smaller one is for the low temp circuit. The bigger one's for the high temp circuit. When it comes to the charge cooler itself, you have hot coolant going through the heat exchanger. The air that passes through cools it, makes its way into the intake manifold, and it cools that air that's going into the engine. It's a similar process for the radiator. You got the hot cooling going through there, gets cooled by the air, makes its way to the turbo and the engine. This method of cooling charged air is definitely a lot more complicated than what we're used to with air-to-air front mount intercoolers, but it's supposed to be a lot more efficient and just a better overall system. The circuit is much smaller, it gets faster to the engine, plus coolant water is better at absorbing that heat from that hot air and just keeping those intake temperatures as low as possible. But it's very easy for an OEM system to get overwhelmed after cycling the car and really pushing the car for an extended amount of time, which is why we're upgrading the heat exchanger today and why we're upgrading the intake manifold. So originally I was gonna do the install here on the ground on jack stands, again, to be more relatable. But I thought about it for video purposes. It's probably gonna be better if we get the car on the lift so you guys can get a better look at what I'm doing. Went ahead and removed the wheels. Now we have access to this radiator. The first thing we're gonna do is drain coolant. So we'll use these two hoses, disconnect them, swap out the radiator while we're here. Do the same for the other side, and I'll show you guys a side-by-side comparison between the OEM one and the CSF one. So both of these are held down by metal clips. So I'll use this pick tool here to pry them so we can drain the coolant. There you go, same for the top one. All right, we'll take a flathead here. Let's see. There you go. I'm surprised it's not using BMW blue. I mean, it is a Toyota after all, right? All right, let's take off the top one. Well, nothing came out of the top one since all of it came out of the bottom. Then you have this bracket. I think this is the only other thing holding on the radiator. There's a 13 mil bolt there, and there's one on the opposite side. And lastly, you have these 4 tabs on each side. Well, 2 on each side. And it should come out. Let's see. So here we have both OEM auxiliary radiators. I did remove the passenger one off camera because it's the same concept as the driver's side one. Quick observation compared to the CSF one. Obviously the construction. The OEM one has the plastic that is known for failing over time. The notorious BMW plastic, as you guys can see, BMW right there. So you do got the plastic ends versus the all metal construction, so it should be a lot more durable. And just look at the thickness. You can look at it from the top right there versus the OEM one. It's almost like twice the thickness, so you have more of a core. You should get way better results when it comes to cooling. Another key difference is the front side of the radiator. You do have this rock guard from factory, but it's made out of plastic, pretty flimsy, probably gets damaged over time. All the CSF ones come pre-installed with these metal, nice little mesh rock guards. So not only does it look cooler, but I think it'll be a lot more effective over time, especially if you're taking your car around the track and you got a bunch of dirt and rocks being kicked at the front of your car. So yeah, I mean, it does the job, but it's plastic, doesn't feel very premium. Here's what the backside looks like. Man, this looks beat up. Car only has like 5,000 miles on it. It already looks like crap. But here's the backside of that one, the CSF one versus the OEM one. The really cool thing about this upgrade is that both radiators are the same, both on passenger and driver side, so it doesn't really matter where you install them. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is install one side so you guys can see the process, and then we'll move on to the heat exchanger. So it should be interesting to see how the CSF one fits, because it's much thicker than the OEM one. Let's see. Little holes at the bottom where the radiator inserts into. There you go. Boom, nice and flush. And then we got to get this bracket back on. And the last thing we got to do is get the hose connected. That clip that we pulled out earlier, you just got to push it in and push it until you hear it. There it is. And then we got the bottom one down here. There we go. Very subtle, but these radiators from CSF look very sleek. I mean, you won't really be able to see them once you install the wheel and the bumper and stuff like that. I mean, you might be able to see some of it in the front. Let me brighten up the camera a little bit. I mean, it's a performance mod that you're not really going to be showing off. It just does a lot of work behind the scenes. And now we just have to remove this hose right here that goes to the heat exchanger so we can continue draining the coolant. And then we'll go up to the top. I think there's one more hose up there, and then we'll start taking off the OEM one. So for the transmission cooler, I was kind of fiddling with this connector. I've never really seen this locking mechanism before. At the bottom you squeeze, and at the top you lift, and I guess it unlocks it. Same for the other side. I didn't do it on camera because it's really hard to get that footage by myself. But anyways, yeah, bottom you squeeze, and then the top section you just pull up. So the trans cooler was a lot simpler to remove than I thought. It didn't make a lot of mess. Actually, no fluid, no transmission fluid made it out. We went ahead and transferred it over to the CSF one, plugged it up for now. But we're probably gonna have to add more, because if you guys see the size comparison, it's like double the size. It's double stacked. Similar to like the oil cooler that I did on the F30. It has 2 different stacked surfaces. So that's pretty cool. And then as far as quality and stuff like that, I mean, you got a gloss black finish versus a traditional just kind of raw aluminum. And yeah, there's not really much to it other than you get 2.
Double the size?
Yeah, you get double the size, which obviously that's a big difference performance-wise and cooling-wise. but it should fit just like OEM. There is a bracket that's in the engine bay for the transmission cooler that attaches to like the front side of the heat exchanger. We're probably gonna have to modify that just to fit this beefy heat exchanger. Talking about the heat exchanger, look at the difference between the stock one and the CSF one.
It's like,
it's almost, no, it's, I would probably say like 2.5 times the size.
something like that.
And again, just like the auxiliary radiators, you have the plastic sides, aka BMW plastic on that side as well. It looks like the rows for fins are a lot larger here versus those are smaller. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, CSF one, triple pass system. You got the OEM one, it's just one pass. Cooling goes by once, makes its way to the intake manifold to cool that charged air. CSF one, 3 passes, 1, 2, 3, then heads over. So obviously it's gonna be a lot more efficient. It's gonna cool the air way better. And then the chances of heat soaking, not very likely. So the OEM heat exchanger came with this rock shields, plastic flimsy, just like the auxiliary radiators. We won't have to use that one since CSF provided a metal one, better construction. So that's gonna go up front. And you do get some hardware in a bracket, so you can mount the CSF transmission cooler to the front of the heat exchanger. So like I said earlier, we gotta cut the existing plastic brackets from the engine bay, add these to the bottom section of this heat exchanger, and then this should mount pretty easily on there once we have the bracket like so. Got the rod guard installed, the one provided by CSF. Transmission cooler is installed onto the heat exchanger. I guess there's a few ways of going about this. You can either remove the transmission cooler, install the heat exchanger first, and then I guess tuck the transmission cooler, mount it, because you do kind of have room right here to work with if you needed to tighten up the screws that it comes with. But I decided to try it out this way, see if we can just get it all at once. And also some of these washers we weren't able to use because the screws would be too short and they wouldn't hold the transmission cooler in place. So we just got rid of the washers, and it's able to hold it. Now it's nice and sturdy. It's not going anywhere. Remember the little plastic brackets I was telling you guys about? So we're gonna go ahead and cut those off so we can fit this beefy heat exchanger in there. And we got a different machine since the other one wasn't doing the job. Alright guys, so this is how everything should look like. The only thing you can really see is obviously the shield, the bottom portion of the heat exchanger, transmission, cooler there, but it's all gonna get covered up once we put everything back together, which I'm about to do, so then we can move on to the intake manifold. But yeah, everything came out pretty good. Fitment in general was pretty spot on for the auxiliary radiators. The front mounted portion, only thing you needed to do was clip those brackets off. But other than that, fitment is really good. So yeah, let me go ahead and put the front end of the car back together, which is really gonna suck. And then we'll move on to the intake manifold. So continuing back with the coolant upgrades on the Supra, it's been several weeks since the last time I was working on the Supra. You know, we had the hurricane here in Florida. Luckily we didn't get hit too bad. I mean, some areas around us were like flooded, but nothing crazy. I still had electricity. None of the cars got damaged. There was no flood at the shop. So anyways, continue with the Supra. Hopefully we can finish it today. So the last step is installing the intake manifold, which is going to be something Ali's going to install into the car so I can get a better angle for you guys and show you what's going on. We have the IKEA set right here, everything labeled. We have instructions that Ali says he's not to use, and we're just trying to figure out how everything goes, and then we'll get started. So the first thing we're doing, blocking off the ports for the nitrous, the meth, the injectors for the pour side, which means we're not really going to be installing the fuel rail today because we don't have the injectors, which I still have to order. Slacking. Originally I didn't know that CSF didn't include them, so I gotta get a hold of those. Plus this kind of works out, at least for now, because you can still rock the OEM beauty cover without modifying it, without the fuel rail. Once you have the fuel rail, you can't do that. which is why a lot of people typically tend to cut it like around this area so that it can expose it. I guess there's two benefits to it. You can show it off, and it's practical because you're gonna need the clearance for those injectors. So for the most part, you've been removing clips from sensors and lines and stuff like that, and you're finally getting to some hardware right now, which is the charge pipe, the throttle body, and then you got some E-socket bolts on the side.
And then after that, I'm not really sure.
Oh yeah, we're just going with the flow, huh?
Ta-da! Well, could be wrong, but I'm using it. Whoa.
Sick. All right, so we have both manifolds here side by side. You guys can tell which one is more superior. I mean, it's no comparison here. First comparison that I really want to do though is I went ahead off camera and took all the coolant out of it. I want to see what the weight difference is. So we're gonna place that on the scale here and see. Let's see. 11 pounds, 1 ounce for the OEM one, and then for the CSF billet one, be really careful here. Let's see if we get a reading. 16 pounds, 2 ounces. So about 4.5 pounds heavier, obviously because it's made out of metal and not plastic, but it's a lot more durable, reliable, and it has a lot more features. Let's take a look inside of the OEM intake manifold. That's what the core looks like. And we go to the CSF one. Here's what you see, which is noticeably taller than the OEM one. Pretty big difference. And of course you got that split right here, like I told you guys earlier, evenly distributes air. Here's a quick look at the bottom of each of them. CSF doesn't have anything. And again, the OEM one has the connectors there. I do got to get those intake manifold gaskets, rubber seals, and transfer them on to the CSF one, which I'm surprised they didn't come included with the CSF kit. But again, not a lot of miles on this car. Instead of just replacing them brand new, I'm just gonna go ahead and transfer these. No, I'm just saying in general, everybody has an issue with everything. Sick. So we're getting the hardware mounted on. It's all replaced from the OEM one to the ones that CSF provides. So you don't have to reuse any of the ones that you took off, for the most part at least. So we did some of the stuff off camera because we were still trying to figure out where everything goes. If you have any doubt, you can just go to the CSF diagram, which is what we did. We used the letters, we figured out where everything goes. So we have the nipple here, so you can install, I believe this is for the beauty cover. And then you got the brackets, so you can install everything that goes over the manifold. This line right here, the map sensor. They do include hardware for all of this stuff, so you don't have to worry about it. Getting the charge pipe back on there. Everything else is going to be pretty self-explanatory because it's the same way that we removed everything. So we're just going to go ahead and fast forward to the part where it is fully installed and ready to go. So we're pretty much in the final stages. We're adding coolant to both the high temp and low temp circuit, bleeding out the system. Here's what the CSF manifold looks like installed. Fitment is really, really good. Fits just like OEM. It's just a lot bigger, but somehow fits just like OEM. And then you still have access to the oil filter back here, which is very cool. You have all the brackets and stuff that we installed that fits all the OEM systems in place, nice and tidy. I'm not a big fan of what the evap system looks like sitting on top of the intake manifold. I've seen others delete that. Gives it a cleaner look. Not sure what all goes into that. But I'm gonna definitely do some research or maybe update you guys on Instagram when I decide to delete that. But I'm very happy with the results. That sounds good. Get you guys an angle of what it looks like with the manifold and the wheels. It's really hard to do that with the camera. In person, you can clearly see the resemblance. Looks pretty dope. But there you have it. That's the CSF manifold and all the coolant parts we installed. I gotta get back to work with the Supra. Gotta remove the DME and send it overseas so we can get it unlocked and tuned, since we got a big turbo kit that's gonna be installed to the car. Originally, I was gonna take the car for a drive, but it looks like we still need some coolant. I gotta add some transmission fluid since we lost some once we were removing the transmission cooler. So I think this is where I'm gonna leave the video, guys. If you need any BMW or A90 Supra performance parts, make sure to check us out, vehiclegarage.com. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. And as always, thanks for watching. Till next time.